And we're back live. Welcome again, everyone, to the 2020 Spring Public Safety UAS Survey Data Presentation. The survey was conducted between AIRT and drone responders about 6 weeks ago. My name is Christopher Todd. I'm the Executive Director of the Airborne International Response Team, or AIRT. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization that proudly supports the mission of drones for good in the US and around the world. And also, we're proud to be the official home of drone responders, led by Chief Werner. Chief, you want to talk a little bit about drone responders and your background?
Sure, thanks, Chris. Hey, everyone, I'm Charles Werner. I'm the retired fire chief from Charlottesville, Virginia, and now the proud director of drone responders. And thank all of you all that have joined. For those of you that haven't joined, please go to droneresponders.org and join the organization to take advantage of the different resources we have available. Membership is free. And we have a resource center that has over 400 documents of SOPs, policy manuals, training materials, et cetera. And want you to take advantage of that. And thanks you all for being here today.
Okay, so we'll jump right into it. Thank you for taking what I'm sure for many of you is your lunch hour or an early morning if you're on the West Coast to join us for this data presentation. It's going to be a PowerPoint presentation where we're going to show you the actual data from the survey. And we'll tell you what some of our key insights are and what we think the data means, but we'll also leave it up to yourselves to kind of interpret what these findings could mean for you, your agency, your operation. So we're screen sharing. Let me get the slideshow started here for you. All right, again, this is the Spring 2020 Public Safety UAS survey results. This is a follow-up survey to the fall survey we conducted about 9 months ago. So we were able to measure some of the differences within that 9-month period with some of the data we collected. As you'll see up here, the total responses for the survey, I tend to do that a lot, I apologize. Total survey responses, 520. Of those, 347 actually completed the entire survey. The segment, the data cut we're looking at here today has 289 responses, and we'll show you why as we get into the control questions. But a little bit about the survey. It is a quantitative method, cross-sectional, self-selected online questionnaire conducted by us between May 26th and June 15th of this year. The survey was directly promoted to a group of highly known, self-selecting public safety UAS professionals, which represented a wide cross-section of the public safety community. We project the margin of error here to be plus or minus about 5%. The data here is copyrighted. You are welcome to reuse it. We would ask that you get permission from us if you're going to publish it. And please use proper attribution for AIRT drone responders for use of the data. All right, so there's going to be 7 sections we cover today. We're going to show you the control questions that kind of break up how we sliced and diced this particular look at the data. We're going to talk about UAS program composition, what we're seeing with programs, how they're budgeting, the financial outlook, some flight operations characteristics. We're going to take a quick look at the data security and legislative outlook issues. We're going to talk about the COVID-19 pandemic, and then we'll summarize what we think this means from our opinion on looking at this data. All right, so the control questions. This again is going to define how this specific cut of the data, where it came from. And I'll tell you right now, all of the data we're looking at today is US based. The survey did go out to people. We've got data from different countries, but we're looking only at the US today and a total universe of 289 respondents from the United States. And then as far as the state or territory, we know this is really hard to see, but it's a pretty good cross section from throughout the US. It is heavy in areas such as Texas, California, Florida, Virginia, New York, where we have a little bit more dense populations and a slightly larger breadth of public safety operations. But we do have responses from basically throughout the entire United States. And the sector, so the survey, we asked, are you academia, are you industry, are you government, are you a nonprofit association? We looked specifically here at those respondents who were part of government. So it's pure government, public safety operations, 100%. And as far as the type of agency, we were very pleased to see a pretty good mix of law enforcement and fire rescue with a little bit of emergency management mixed in. We're seeing about 43% of the survey respondents were law enforcement related, about 37% were fire rescue, 13% coming from the emergency management side, and others rounding out about 6% with a little bit of EMS healthcare mixed in with one respondent. And then we asked what type of jurisdiction best describes your agency or organization. And by and large, county or parish and municipal, meaning city, town, village, were the two largest sectors here. About 82% of the survey respondents for this data cut coming at what we would call the local level, meaning county or smaller, 11% at the state level, about 5% federal, and about 1% combining indigenous and the international. So what is the population of your jurisdiction? So all respondents for this cut had populations of 1,000 or larger. We consider our major cities group to be those jurisdictions with populations of 500,000 or more people. So looking at the numbers there, the major cities really represent about almost 21% here of the survey respondents, with smaller jurisdictions of 499,999 or less, the remaining 80%. And we also asked the respondents to identify what their role within their public safety UAS program was. And as we get into the numbers on that, we'll see about 79% claim to be Part 107 certified pilots. About 9% claim to be drone operators, not Part 107 certified. What that could mean is that they operate the drone in the presence of a PIC, or they could be, some other status that they've been assigned within their agency that is not necessarily Part 107. 64% UAS program managers, about 21% claim to be part of a technical operations unit, forensic investigation, crime scene investigation. 39% claim to be sworn public safety officers, with just over 23% mid-level leadership, sergeants, lieutenants, captains, upper level at about 13%, and chiefs and senior level leadership at about 22%. So we feel pretty good that we've got a nice representation there across the public safety sector from the different disciplines and different levels of leadership and operations. Okay, so we'll get into the survey data here in the program composition. And this was a question we asked last fall: how long has your public safety UAS program been operational? We saw the bulk of the answers here were 1 to 2 years. Some were just getting started, some were less than 1 year, and then 2 to 3 years, more than 3 years, but that sweet spot was in the 1 to 2. As we asked that question here in the spring, we see the numbers moving down to the lower tiers. And I should point out too, there's slightly different data characteristics here. Here we asked, we're just getting started, less than 1 year. We tightened that up here in the spring survey. So the green is the exploratory phase, and then less than 1 year is the blue, 1 year, 2 years, 3 or more years. So as we look at those comparatively, what we're basically seeing here is that the tenure and the length of public safety programs is increasing as time goes on. So within the last 9 months, we've seen a shift that programs are becoming more mature, which means there should be more data, more expertise to be shared within the community as those programs mature. And let me turn it over to Chief Werner. Chief, you have any other insights on that you want to offer?
Yeah, I just think a lead-in that we're going to see is that as we're seeing that the programs are maturing more, it's going to have an impact on the questions that we cover as we go forward.
Okay, so moving on to the next question, we asked how many drone operators and or remote pilots currently participate in your public safety program. This was the fall data, but we're seeing roughly 60% had 5 or less remote pilots, drone operators in their program, about another 22%, 6 to 9. So we're really almost 80%-ish there at 9 or less remote pilots in their program. As we asked that same question here 6 weeks ago, we see the numbers are starting to get deeper in the lower tiers. So that would be indicative of programs now having more remote pilots, more drone operators currently participating in their programs. And you see that reflected also in the numbers down here, where we had 10 to 15, more than 15, at roughly 9%. Now we're seeing 16%, almost 11%. So again, programs getting larger. Chief, any thoughts on that?
I think that, again, the maturity of the program shows that there's an increase in what their activity is and realizing the need for more remote pilots.
Absolutely. And then we asked about training. This again from last fall. including training. How many public safety UAS missions does your program typically fly on average each calendar month? Almost 60% were flying between 1 to 5 missions. Almost another 20% were 6 to 10 missions. So that's almost 80%, 10 missions or less per month. As we look at the spring data, we see ever so slightly, it's starting to tick forward where more missions are being flown. And you can see that a little bit more clearly here in the data, again, where these lower tiers are getting a little bit more populated, slightly more missions in the lower tier numbers, which tells us that programs are starting to fly more missions. Chief Werner, any thoughts?
You know, again, I think it goes back to the maturity, and as the programs begin to be successful and they learn best practices from other departments, we're seeing that play into the number of missions that are being flown.
Yeah, so we're seeing programs with more experience, we're seeing more operators, and we're seeing more missions. So together, those three things are trending up, telling us that public safety drone programs generally are growing over the last 9 months. In section 3, we got into budgeting and finance, and we asked, what is your projected fiscal year 2020 annual budget for your public safety UAS program? You'll see here, alarmingly, about 22% less than $1,000. Almost staggering if you really think about it. And then when you look at the 1,000 to 999,000, another 32%. So we've got, as you see down here, we've got 56% of public safety drone programs claim to be operating with budgets of less than $10,000 per year. You know, I think that speaks to the opportunities for the solution providers, the manufacturers. Probably explains a little bit why we see certain types of aircraft selling more than some of the more expensive advanced aircrafts. It's also important to note here what we're seeing with the 50,000 or greater. That's a pretty significant chunk, and that I think is, you know, we've discussed internally is really a look at the major cities group and those jurisdictions of 500,000 or more with larger budgets. So we're seeing kind of a story of the haves and have-nots here. And Chief Werner, you may want to expand on that just a bit.
Well, I think that you've covered it pretty well. I mean, the bottom line is we're seeing that there's still a lot of departments across the country that are operating on a shoestring budget and, you know, under $10,000. But I think we're also seeing the increase in the numbers. The 30, 40, and 50 areas are probably in the major cities.
And moving on, we asked, which of the following best describes the importance of grants and or donations for funding support of your public safety UAS program? Over half of the respondents claim that grants are extremely important and about 12% very important. And we'll go to the next slide here where we can actually see how this illustrates a little bit stronger. We've got 64% of programs saying that grant funding and donations are either essential for the program to exist or represent a sizable portion of their program's funding. Another 25% saying the grant programs are slightly important or helpful for their program, and then roughly 10% saying it's not at all important. So I think the key takeaway here is that about 90% of public safety drone programs are relying on some form of grant funding or donations as a portion of the funding for their program. Chief, any thoughts?
No, I think that covers it.
Okay. We asked, does your organization intend to purchase any new drones between now and December 31st, 2020? Again, this question was asked about 6 weeks ago, so right around the June 1st-ish mark. And with COVID-19 pandemic, we weren't really sure what the outcome was going to be here. We're seeing that almost 30% say, yes, we intend to purchase 2 or more new UAS before the end of the year. And about another 20% saying, yes, we intend to purchase 1 new drone before the end of the year. We had another 25%, which were basically a flat no, we're not going to be making any purchases, and 26% were unsure. So we think that this is actually pretty good news for manufacturers and drone sellers for the remainder of the calendar year in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. Of course, that pandemic continues to escalate and evolve in ways that no one's really able to predict right now. So could budgets be impacted by the pandemic as it escalates, or could other factors such as the current protest be impacting budgets? Yeah, So we'll see how that pans out. But I think the good news here is that there is a market for drone purchases. Chief, any thoughts on the budgeting and how agencies should be planning for this?
I think you hit on the nail on the head. The good news is there still looks like there's a number of people, a number of agencies that are going to be buying drones. I think that our concern was that it was going to be much more severe, because what I've been hearing from my colleagues is that if you're looking to buy something new, not necessarily drone specific, but anything new, the answer was no. So I think this shows it's a little bit different, that maybe that money is still somewhat protected from how they're going to go forward.
Great insight. All right, we're going to roll into section 4 right now, flight operations. And we asked, under what authority does your UAS program operate? Check all that apply. So again, very important to remember, this is check all that apply. And no surprise, FAA Part 107 rule, 89% of respondents claim to be operating under Part 107. Section 333, about 7%. Public aircraft operation, 21% claim to be operating as a PAO. We'll see some data later that caused us to kind of turn our heads on this one and wonder if there might be some misunderstanding surrounding what a PAO actually is. We're seeing 28% of agencies report that they have operated under an SGI, and other authorization, 21%, unclear what that other authorization might be, and about 6% other. So Chief, any comments on the amount of Part 107 operators or anything else here that we should be aware of?
No, I think we still need to drill down and maybe add a little more definition in our future as to what things mean, so that we can make sure people are understanding all the questions.
Yep. All right, this is it's a little bit difficult to see the graphic here, but I think that big orange bar kind of tells the story. Which of the following brands of UAS does your public safety agency or organization currently operate? Check all that apply. So this was a question where, do you have this brand in your fleet? It doesn't talk about the number of aircraft you have, or do you have 10 of one brand versus 5 of another brand. We simply just asked, is this brand in your fleet? And no surprise, DJI is the leading brand that most public safety agencies are flying. We can see it a little bit more clear down here, 91% claim to be operating DJI. What was notable to us was the Skydio number of the survey respondents. Almost 11% of the respondents claim to have Skydio in their fleet. And if you think about it, the Skydio 2 has really been on the market for the past 9 months or less. So it was notable to see that many agencies reporting Skydio in their fleet. And when we look at Autel at 9%, Parrot just over 7%, Unique 7%, all within a pretty close range to Skydio, but nobody's really close to DJI right now, and that's not surprising. Chief, anything here you want to expand on?
Yeah, I think that when we're looking at this, we're seeing the numbers. This doesn't necessarily mean the total marketplace of what people are doing, but we're seeing the presence of certain types of manufacturers in the fleet of an agency. So it is interesting to see the numbers that are coming up. I think the Skydio has a lot to say about the sense and avoid technology that it has, and the interest in that for a niche market in certain types of missions, and then other people exploring what that's like.
Yeah, and I think another takeaway here is, although we didn't get into it specifically or directly, but if you look at Wingstra, if you look at SenseFly, AeroVironment, which offer a lot of fixed wing capabilities, or Delta Wing or VTOL, still not a lot of numbers there. I mean, by and far, we would say here that that most agencies are operating quadcopters or rotorcraft aircraft. Also notable 3DR, which obviously is not really selling, actively manufacturing or selling aircraft anymore, but still about 3% of public safety programs claiming to operate 3DR aircraft in their fleet. So that's something we'll be continuing to track as well. All right, we asked, which of the following types of public safety drone missions has your organization flown to date in calendar year 2020? Not surprising that training and exercises was the leader at around 82%. Other categories, target search coming up a close second, and that includes search and rescue for the most part. We've got incident command and control live streaming right up there, crime scene investigation, mapping, non-forensic, rounding out the top 5. So as we look at the numbers a little bit more down here, just over 82% claiming to be flying training and exercises, 56% target search, including search and rescue. Again, 52% incident command and control or live streaming with crime scene forensic analysis and non-forensic mapping, rounding out that top category. Security overwatch, which we also had surveillance, that's something we're going to be breaking out in future research surveys. Surveillance obviously is kind of a tricky word right now, especially when used publicly. And we wanted to dive into the data a little bit more deeply with, is it a high risk warrant type of surveillance, or is it maybe a protest surveillance or overwatch or security overwatch at a music festival or a special event? So we're gonna delve more deeply into that as we get into future surveys. And another point here too is, as I mentioned earlier, we've got the ability to cut this data and look at different angles of it. We can look at law enforcement only. We can look at fire rescue only. As we took a look at this law enforcement versus fire rescue, the types of missions did change as you would expect slightly. You would expect fire rescue to have more hazmat, more structure fire missions. You would expect law enforcement to have more SWAT related missions. But we did see overlap in both areas, which kind of told us that there's probably support taking place between both fire rescue and law enforcement in certain jurisdictions. Chief, you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, what I wanted to say about this goes back to my earlier point of the maturity of the programs. As most of you that are online now know, we started off with a very narrow scope. And I remember in 2015, I think I wrote my first article talking about 7 ways that we would be using unmanned aircraft systems as far as missions supporting public safety. And now it's almost every one of our missions that we're operating unmanned aircraft systems because of the value they bring. And I never will forget, I was on a panel with Tom Madigan, the assistant sheriff from Alameda County Sheriff's Office, who made the statement at the end of his presentation: if you don't have a public safety UAS program, you're negligent. And he was saying that really primarily from the point of safety, is you're able to see so many more things that you can identify with to help make better decisions in the strategy and tactics. And what you see here is this huge, a wide scope of how this is being done, which also means that we have to look at how we're going forward with training and how we're going to train to make each one of these work.
Okay. As we move forward, we asked, how does your agency or organization obtain authorization to operate UAS in controlled U.S. airspace? Check all that apply. LANCE or UAS data exchanges, about 58% of respondents claim to be using LANCE for airspace authorization. 62% claim to be using FAA COAs. And this is where we had some questions about the public aircraft operation. Again, we had about 23% of agencies claiming to operate under a PAO designation, but only about 13% claiming to obtain airspace authorization via their PAO. So we're wondering if there might be a little bit of a disconnect there, or if there might be some confusion surrounding what the definition of a public aircraft operation really is. None of the above are unsure. Those could be those programs that are just spinning up, or folks that just aren't in tune in how that's happening. Chief, any thoughts on that?
Sorry, I couldn't find the mute button.
No worries.
No, I don't really have anything more to say about that.
Okay. All right. Does your organization desire to conduct beyond visual line of sight public safety drone operations? Not much of a surprise here. Yeses were a pretty firm 75%, no's about 12%, and unsure roughly 12%. I think, the key takeaway here is that there might be some confusion, or not really confusion, but people might not be understanding the complete scope of what a BVLOS operation could be. I think inherently when people think beyond visual line of sight, they're thinking those long linear flight operations such as a power transmission line inspection, pipeline inspection, railway inspection. But for public safety, beyond visual line of sight can mean just the ability to fly around the backside of a structure fire and look in the window, or maybe an active shooter situation where there's an active shooter and you don't want the operator in direct line of sight of the shooter, and the aircraft needs to fly around corners and keep the operator in safe proximity. We've also had some headway very recently with Chula Vista in the BVLOS area. Chief, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, for about the past 8 months, many of you may have seen and heard that we've been working on, it's gone through a number of different iterations. We first called it dangerous missions waiver. We applied for a COVID-19 waiver with similar type circumstances. But recently, Chula Vista was the first to receive what's now called by the FAA as a tactical beyond visual line of sight waiver. Our goal was to create the ability that we could fly in unusual situations like an active shooter or a hazmat situation where having a remote pilot and or the visual observer could be in direct harm's way if they were in line of sight. After the IPP meeting, a number of iterations back and forth, Chula Vista got the first, Pearland, Texas got the second. All of this falls on, I have to give credit to York County, Virginia's work first. A year ago, I guess about a year ago, they got their waiver, which is more extensive as far as a safety case and helped to forge the way. But what this means now is that they mentioned this in the FAA virtual symposium, that under dangerous mission situations, public safety can fly 1,500 feet out laterally, 50 feet above a building, not to exceed 400 AGL, which gives us that ability to fly what we believe in an environment that would be safe for the national airspace, but give us that tactical advantage in those very unique situations. And we're hoping that what's next is this will become a part of the blanket COA and issue to all the COA holders. And that's our, fingers crossed, we hope that's the announcement that's going to be made in August.
Okay, great insight. As we move forward, we asked, which of the following FAA operational waivers does your agency or organization currently possess? Not surprisingly, 62% or so claim to be in possession of a daylight operations waiver, allowing them to operate at night. Somewhat surprisingly is almost 19% claim to have visual line of sight, with roughly, and let's go down to the numbers here, 16% visual observer. So what is unclear is we've heard some of the new public safety COAs coming out are containing language that provide for these types of operations within the COA automatically. So it's tough to discern the difference between how much of these could be those new COAs with that language or how much of these are standalone operational waivers that may be in possession by a public safety agency. Chief, you have any thoughts or comments or insight on this?
I think again the point is that we've got to look at spelling these out a little bit more clearly so that we can make sure that we understand and that they understand and answer the questions correctly.
Okay. Moving on, Section 5, data security and the legislative outlook. So the first question we asked here, and this was last fall, is the FAA responsive to the needs of public safety UAS programs? Where we had about 58% said yes, about a hard 20% said no, and about 22% were unsure. When we asked this same question 6 weeks ago, we saw a slight increase in the yeses. So now we went from 58 to about 65% saying yes. The no's went from 20% down to about 12%, and the unsures increased ever so slightly. And you can kind of see that better down here with yeses increasing about 7% and the no's increasing roughly 7-8%. So the FAA does appear to be moving in the right direction in how they're responding to public safety programs, at least as perceived by public safety. I will also point out that we looked at this specific question through the major cities data cut. So those jurisdictions of 500,000 population or greater, and the numbers were slightly higher for the FAA. They actually thought the FAA was doing an even better job at supporting their needs. So that was good to see that their needs were being met, and it was also notable. Chief, any thoughts on this?
Yes, I think I'd like to point out that I think a large percentage of the approvals have come during the special government interest SGI, formerly called emergency COAs, process, because what we've seen there is I think we saw a pretty high number, upwards of 20-some to 30% of departments using the SGI waivers, is the responsive to this by phone is usually given to us in minutes to be able to fly in very dangerous or situations where we need to be quickly flying. So I think that's a large part of that, as well as there is a lot of interaction currently with the FAA. And I will say that along with the tactical waiver, which is very important for us, again, that's another example of the FAA changing a very staunch position of we're not going to do that to changing.
Okay, great insight. Moving on. Fall, we asked, are you concerned about the security of your drone data and any potential vulnerabilities within the UAS or related software that might allow a foreign company or government to receive sensitive information surrounding your domestic flight operations? So again, this was last fall, and the numbers here were about 38% were concerned, about 54% were not concerned, and about 8% were unsure. As we move into the spring version of this question, it's really important to note that we changed the phraseology of how the question was asked a little bit, and it unfortunately was asked as a little bit more of a leading question. So in the spring, we asked, how concerned are you about the security of your drone data and any potential security vulnerabilities within the UAS or related software that might allow a foreign government or company to receive sensitive information? So here we unfortunately assume that there was some level of concern, and thank you to the DJI team for pointing this out as we went through the peer review on it. We should have asked, are you concerned, and got a yes or no here. And then from the yeses kind of jumped into the how concerned are you, but it is what it is. So the data as reported for the spring is about 20% are not at all concerned, and with 80% kind of making up the other categories here, with 28% roughly slightly concerned, 26% moderately concerned, 12% very concerned, 13% extremely concerned. So the one takeaway here that is probably indisputable is that if you assume that the question wasn't that leading, about 80% have some level of concern about the issue, but it's not necessarily very or extremely concerned. So it's really across the board, which would tend to provide that there might be some confusion too going on in the marketplace. Chief, you want to expand on this?
Yeah, the other thing that I'd say, I think that when it comes to security of the drone data and everything that's swirling around it, I think that it could also be because of some of the uncertainties of legislation or executive orders, of people not knowing where things are and how they're going to impact how this goes forward. So I think that plays a role in this as well.
Okay, and as we move forward, we asked, how concerned are you about the potential impact that federal congressional legislation or executive action could have on your public safety drone operation? Again, this is one of those where we're seeing not at all concerned is maybe 7%, but 93% have some level of concern on this issue, with 26% extremely concerned, 24% very concerned, moderately concerned at 28%, and slightly concerned 16%. What's really interesting is if you look at this question and compare the results against the earlier question on grant funding and donations, we tend to see some similarities in the amount of answers per category that could be based on the level of dependency on grant funding and donations, meaning that those agencies which are more dependent on grant funding for their program could be escalating their level of concern surrounding the impact that federal congressional legislation or executive action might be having on their operation. Chief Werner, any comments?
No, I don't have anything to add to that.
Okay. We asked, is your organization interested in deploying counter drone, counter UAS technology for public safety purposes? Yes, and we already have, is about 11%. Yes, and we have not deployed, 28%. And then no, we are not interested, 39%, unsure about 20%. Couple comments on this. We actually took a look at this data cut, law enforcement versus fire rescue. As expected, law enforcement was slightly higher in their eagerness and desire to deploy counter UAS, but there was still a lot of interest on the fire rescue side. So the numbers weren't as drastic as one might expect. Fire rescue is also interested in counter UAS technology. Another comment that came up through some of our peer review sessions is that counter drone technology or CUAS might have different meanings for different people. Sometimes it could just mean the detection phase which a lot of the products out there do and conduct legally with user consent? Or does it mean interdiction and overtaking the flight operation, which is kind of a whole different escalation? So that's something too that you'll probably see us explore in future research. Chief, do you have any comments on that?
No, again, I think that we know that for any real true deployment of UAS technology, which is a mitigation of or bringing down an aircraft, that's going to be at the federal level at this point. So it will be interesting to dig into this a little deeper as we go forward.
Yeah, and we will be able to cut into this too, to take a look at like major cities, federal users, to see how these numbers change. And that's something, if you or your agency have specific needs to get that information, let us know, and we'll get into it. All right. Section 6, the COVID-19 pandemic, obviously something that's affecting everyone these days. Has your organization flown a public safety drone mission in direct response to the COVID-19 pandemic? 25% saying yes, about 72% saying no, and there is about 3% who were unsure. So as we get into this a little bit deeper, we asked only those who said yes. So we took the no's out, focusing only at those who said yes. We said, what type of public safety drone mission did your organization fly? And the greatest type of mission was a public information support mission. So down here we see the PIO missions, media support, at about 48%. What type of missions could those be? Those could be using drones to take a look at the long line of cars at a testing site. It could be telling the story of how empty the streets are. Kind of unclear on what all the different uses are for the PIO role, but notable that PIO was the most reported mission to be flown. Social distance monitoring and enforcement, 25% of agencies flying in support of COVID-19 claim to have flown in support of social distancing and enforcement. And other, which is really a hodgepodge of about 17 mostly unique different missions, from mapping out the sites for a testing center, things along those lines. So Chief Werner, you have any comments on this?
Yeah, I just think the nuances that we found is that some of the use of drones during the COVID-19 pandemic were not necessarily positive for public safety, where we saw the drones flying and yelling at people or trying to communicate a message that couldn't be clearly understood, created a little bit of frustration from people. And then we saw in Connecticut where they tried to do a program to use a drone to measure temperature and coughing and other symptoms to identify that, and the community rebuffed that as being really an invasion of their privacy. So we have to be really careful in how we're going forward to use drones during these types of situations.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to note that, you know, this pandemic's not over, and it seems to be kind of evolving in different ways that, you know, there's uncertainty surrounding how long it's going to last, and how it's going to move forward, how bad it's going to get. So we may see these numbers change. We may see more use cases come out, more types of technology that can impact the types of operations. So it'll be interesting to do some follow-up on this as time progresses, and hopefully looking back in the rearview mirror at COVID-19 at some point in the not too distant future. We asked, what, if any, financial impact do you project the COVID-19 pandemic will have on your public safety UAS program for the foreseeable future? And you kind of see the results coming in here are pretty much divided. No impact, about 33% saying they don't expect the COVID-19 pandemic will have any impact on their public safety drone program. It'll be business as usual, with another 22% saying limited impact. There'll be a slightly reduced budget or tighter cost controls. So right there, that's about 55% saying limited impact to no impact. As a moderate impact, 26%, and severe impact, 20%. And again, important to recognize that this data is 6 weeks old, roughly. So as the pandemic continues to escalate, this could change as budgets start to get drained, as leadership and elected officials tend to want to pull money from certain pots to cover costs associated with the pandemic response. So we'll have to keep tracking that to see what the impact is. But I think this kind of speaks to also that earlier question on drone purchases. Are you going to purchase one or more UASs this year? And we're seeing similar answers here. Chief Werner, you have any insights here you care to offer?
Yeah, I think what we've seen from this is that we're pleased that it wasn't more severe than it was. Many of my colleagues that I talked to had said when it came to anything new from a purchase perspective, that new meant no. And it's good to see here that it looks like in some cases, in large majority of cases, that the purchases have been preserved and it's not going to impact things as negatively as we thought. So there's some good vibes there.
All right, so getting into the summary section, and now we're in the final stretch here. The last question, how important is the ability to track and understand how different public safety organizations around the world are using drones for good? And we're seeing, in summary this tells you is 97% of agencies basically do believe there's some level of importance surrounding tracking and understanding how different public safety organizations around the world are using this technology. And I think case in point, kudos again to DJI for rolling out that the GIS map about 2 weeks ago that tracks the number of human lives saved by drones around the world. And I think that type of graphic representation and data is going to be really important to help tell that story, because there is an appetite for that. Chief, you want to expand on that at all?
Yeah, I think the number of missions and the diversity that we saw has been increasing for the very reason that people are either having good experiences and exploring new things, or they're learning from others that have done it. One of the things that we're going to explore is to see how we can capture best practices and do some reporting on that, so that can actually share more information to those people out there, so that we can continue to evolve and expand how the drones are being used in public safety.
All right, so getting into the summary, and again, this is kind of the insight that Chief Werner and I and our team had put together. It had been peer reviewed and vetted with different partners, and we also conducted some telephone follow-up conversations to make sure we were on track if there was some discrepancy with the data, or if the data findings we just weren't completely comfortable with it. We talked to some other folks to validate the perceptions we had here. And you probably started reading already. I'll just read it. Public safety UAS programs are growing as measured both in the number of remote pilots per program and the number of missions flown each calendar month. However, most public safety agencies are continuing to bootstrap their UAS program with small budgets and extremely limited funding. The bulk of UAS public safety agencies rely on some form of grant funding to sustain their UAS program. Uncertainty surrounding the potential legislative action that could impact the ability of public safety agencies to procure certain drones and related parts via federal grant money is causing a good amount of concern for the majority of these programs. Also, concerns surrounding the security of drone data and other potential security vulnerabilities within foreign-made UAS technology is also prevalent. DJI brand drones continue to dominate the public safety UAS sector with more than a 90% market share. Skydio has surged to become the second-ranked player in the public safety UAS sector within the last 3 quarters, at least in terms of fleet composition, from what we're seeing. And Autel, Parrot, and Unique all remain in close striking distance to Skydio for that number 2 slot. Moving on to the next page, 90% of public safety UAS programs are operating under FAA Part 107. Most of these agencies claim to possess an FAA airspace COA, but also use Lance for certain flight operations. Training flights remain the most commonly flown mission in the public safety UAS community. And the COVID-19 pandemic is impacting the public safety UAS sector, but the outlook is not as dire as one might fear. 1 out of 2 public safety drone programs report a moderate to severe financial impact on their operations from the virus. Conversely, about half of public safety UAS programs expect to purchase 1 or more new UAS before the end of 2020. And this bodes well for UAS manufacturers targeting the increasingly competitive public safety sector. 1 out of every 4 public safety UAS programs report having flown drones in direct report of a COVID-19 mission. The vast majority of these were for public information missions. Counter-drone technology remains an emerging segment of the market, with 40% of public safety UAS programs claiming to have an interest in deploying CUAS tech for public safety purposes. And finally, 97% of public safety UAS professionals believe it is important to track and understand how public safety organizations around the world are using drones for good. if you have questions, comments, feel free to contact either Chief Werner or myself. Those are our email addresses. We're gonna open it up to questions here from the chat box in a second, but I also want to tell you, yes, many of you are asking, is this data going to be made publicly available? It is publicly available right now. If you go to droneresponders.org/research, you will be able to download this the same presentation you've seen right here. You will need to be a Drone Responders member to log that to download that report. There's no cost to joining. So if you are a member, just log in using your Drone Responders account. You'll be able to download it. If you are not a member, you just go through the quick sign up form and you'll be able to download it there. You can also access the data by going to airt.ngo/research, and you'll be able to access the report on airt.ngo as well. That being said, I'm gonna cut the show as far as the screen sharing. And Chief Werner, you want to move over to the chat box and see what questions we have?
Yeah, I've been answering most of them. Let's see if I can go back here to. For some reason, I can't open the chat button.
Okay, here's what it says. The budget does not seem to include personnel. Yeah, I think that's kind of getting at the collateral duty requirement. We didn't actually specify whether or not personnel would be included in the budget. We just asked what the overall budget was for a program. But Chief, maybe you want to talk a little bit about collateral duty and how that factors in.
Yeah, I think the issue is we didn't ask the specific question as a breakdown between personnel and cost. I would guess that the budgets that people put forward have been more focused on purchasing of equipment. That would be my thought, because most, as Chris mentioned, most of the people are flying as part of collateral duty, so it's not a defined separation of personnel for the overall response. There are some, but there are very few that actually have dedicated people for public safety UAS programs, and we're starting to see a little bit more of that, especially when it comes to the major cities. More definition, more dedicated resources.
Okay, and a question from Chief Sadler, York County. Would be interesting to know how much annual funding goes towards maintaining equipment, batteries, et cetera, and Part 107 testing versus new equipment. Yeah, that's not something we've really delved into. Chief, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think what we've seen is that one of the important messages that we try to convey is that if you're thinking about getting into a program, there's really a lot more. It's not just you go buy the aircraft and you fly the aircraft. There's a whole lot of things that go into it: training, documentation, maintenance, logistics of an operation. It's just not a one person or single person that's operating. So some of our reports in the future may be looking more at the maintenance issues. But again, some people probably aren't doing what they need to be doing because they don't know. So because it's maintenance of the aircraft, the batteries, the payload accessories and those things that go with it. So again, it starts getting complicated, especially the more equipment, the larger your fleet gets.
And a question from across the pond, Lee Newman: is Lance like an exemption to fly like we have in the UK, where they use the emergency services exemption? Maybe you want to just touch on Lance real quick.
Well, Lance is basically was put out there originally for the commercial users to make their requests in certain types of airspace where they need to have approval. And public safety does use it in some occasions. And then a lot of occasions where we have emergent responses, we go into the SGI, the Special Government Interest Request, formerly known as emergency COAs.
Okay, and question two, if anyone's getting grants for UAS purchases, you know, we've got some folks here who would like to know, so if you are procuring grants for your UAS program and you have a template or care to share any information or any advice on how to go about getting those grants, please forward that information to us here at Drone Responders. We'd like to distribute it to everyone and get that information out there if you're willing to share. Let's see, looking through here to see if there's any other questions. In light of recent events, do you think this will inspire more industries and regions to invest more into UAS when the time presents itself? Generally speaking, I would say yes, as definitely as we start to see you know, more technology producing a positive return on investment, I think that'll happen. Chief, your thoughts on that?
I think you covered it.
Okay. What organizations are best focused to provide a state agency with a new drone program? Chief,
What was that again?
What organizations are best focused to provide a state agency with a new drone program?
Well, I think we, in our resource center, we have a guidelines and considerations that if you're going to start a program, that it goes through and kind of outlines the different things that you need to do. And it kind of goes through and highlights all the different areas and aspects. And then there's like I said, there's just a lot of information within the resource center, over 400 documents of SOPs, training programs, policy manuals, and everything in there that you can look at. But if you run into not seeing or having what you need, email me directly at charles@droneresponders.org, and I'll see if I can connect you with someone who can help you with that.
Yep. And then there's a follow-up on that, is seeking for more information on grants too for new drone programs. So again, if you have any grant information you're willing to share, please send it to us at Drone Responders.
Particularly if there's any grants, anybody is actually successful from the CARES Act grant that's out for the COVID-19 support stuff, or the DOJ, the grant that's referenced in the chat discussions would be helpful.
Yep, absolutely. Can we make a standard operation manual for operators to use drones in public? I know that's something you've been exploring, Chief. Any thoughts on that?
Well, yes, we're working on some things right now. I'll just give you a sneak preview. We're working on a new document called the 5 Cs. It's principles of operating public aircraft, especially since we've seen some of the negativity come from COVID-19 flights, as well as some of the demonization of law enforcement. We're putting together some guidelines, and we've been working with Skydio that will come out Monday of next week to kind of give some guidance on some things we want to make sure we do to protect all that we've gotten. We may be looking at doing something from a standardized approach to a general SOP, but because things are somewhat unique in different places, depending on what you're flying and which agency you're with, it becomes a little bit unique and requires some customization at every point.
All right, and well, that's we're at the last call for questions, so we've got about a minute or two left. If you have a question and you want to pop it in that chat box, we're happy to take it on.
I see one question here, Chris. It says, you stated in your summary that concerns surrounding the security of drone data and other potential security vulnerabilities within foreign-made, emphasis added, UAS technology is also prevalent. The question you asked did not focus on foreign-made drones, correct?
I believe it did. I believe we asked, I believe it was phrased foreign made, but we'll confirm that for you. Also a question that came in, why no mention of the Civil Air Patrol?
Yeah, and I answered that. I answered that I'm not really sure why we would mention Civil Air Patrol specifically. With the exception of we're partners with the Civil Air Patrol, we're going to be looking at doing some recruitments of people that may be outside of public safety or retired from public safety or looking a way to contribute. We know that they have 52 air wings in each one of the states. So we're going to promote that for the Civil Air Patrol to hopefully get people that will join and encourage people in the Civil Air Patrol to join drone responders, so we can cross pollinate our organizations with what we're doing. They are the largest federal fleet, as far as I know, of aircraft. They fly both sensitive missions and civilian missions. So they're on both sides of the security issues. And with that, they're very proactive. So I'm not really sure what else I would mention with that.
Another question, do you foresee any type of organized lobby effort to inform Congress how important DJI aircraft are to public safety agencies due to the amount of money invested in aircraft at this point?
Let me answer that question. So I've been on the Hill, and I have had conversations with members of Congress and their staff on both sides of the aisle. And I will tell you that we've made the point that there's some concern because of the investments that have been made. Their response has been, this does not interfere with the current operations or those people that have drones already. That's not going to change how they can operate as far as state and local agencies go. It is different for the federal agencies. But what I found is the more discussion that we had about it, the more aggravated they became. And then COVID-19 only complicated the matter even more.
And I would just add, you know, we've had some questions throughout the last several months if AIRT or drone responders are going to actively take a stance on this. Due to our 501c3 charitable status, we are explicitly prohibited from advocacy. So we are not allowed to go out there and advocate and do lobbying or anything like that. So you won't see that coming from AIRT or drone responders. Not that we don't think it's an important issue, but it's just not something that we are allowed to undertake via the way we are structured. Question, as a skilled 107 pilot and a level 1 thermographer and a waiver holder, how does one get their public safety sector know you're hearing that? How does one get their UAS public, not sure, maybe get into the public safety sector? Not an easy answer to that question, but I will say that relationships are really key to anything in this industry. So if you're looking to carve your way into a certain discipline, whether it's thermography, whether it's public safety, emergency response, power line inspections, you've got to develop some expertise and develop some relationships, and probably have a little bit of luck. But it's obviously a very competitive environment, but there are a lot of agencies out there looking for help from people who are qualified and have the right equipment. And so I would say, reach out to your local public safety agency if you're not working with them already, and look for a way to maybe participate in an exercise with them.
And then there was another reference about if we were following Chula Vista on the close proximity, low altitude waiver. That was the original thing that we talked about earlier. The bottom line is that evolved into what's now known as the tactical waiver that's been issued by the FAA to Chula Vista and Pearland, Texas, and that we're hoping it's going to become something that goes to every COA holder. It was something to point out here that we didn't talk about before. This waiver is only available to members that are in departments that have COAs, certificates of authorizations. So those of you that are operating on Part 107 alone, I don't know when or if that's going to come. And the reason that the FAA is willing to do these issuances is because it transfers the liability from the FAA to the legal entity that's actually doing the flying. So if you don't have a COA, you might want to think about getting one, at least a blanket COA to go forward.
And last question we'll take as we're running out of time. Can you tell us again where we can find this data online? Yes, the data is available at either research.droneresponders.org or droneresponders.org/research. And again, you will need to have a Drone Responders member account, which is free. There's no charge for that. So either log in through your Drone Responders account or simply create an account, and you will be able to download this same presentation. Or you can visit airt.ngo/research, and you can download it there as well. Chief, any closing comments or thoughts before we wrap it up?
No, I'd just like to thank everyone for coming and visiting today and listening to the survey, asking the questions, getting engaged. There's just a lot of activity that's going on. We're always trying to do some of this research to find out where things are, how we can find gaps or things that we can begin to work on, and to share that information with you so that as you're either in public safety or you're in industry or academia or any of the other fields that we talked about, that you have kind of a feel for where things are. And we learn from you all and the questions that are asked, what questions we might ask in the future or some nuances to that. But again, thank you for everybody for being here.
Yeah, and I would echo that. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your continued support of the AIRT mission, of the Drone Responders mission. Also, just quick housekeeping. As many of you know, we've launched a new podcast series recently. Chief and I are alternating weeks. Podcast series A, Taming Disaster, Drones for Good, is available. We have a new episode out right now featuring Gemma Alcock from the UK, where we're talking about drones and search and rescue. So that's a new episode you can download today. Chief, your episode, I think, is your most recent is with Chief Chris Sadler from York County. Want to talk about
so
that?
in kind of the sequence of things to come, we've got York County with Chief Sadler talking about their program, how they've grown. Next up would be Chula Vista talking about their program, what they've done, the experiences they've had. And then next lined up with that, we have LA City Fire that's going to talk about some of the nuances in theirs and some of the unique things they found. And then after that, you'll see Alameda County Sheriff's Office with Tom Madigan. So we've got a great lineup of podcasts recorded and ready to come to you.
And for more information on the podcast, you can visit airt.ngo/podcasts or droneresponders.org/podcasts, and you'll see links for all the information. You can also look those podcasts up on your favorite podcast channel.
And one more thing. We also started in June our 3 awards for outstanding drone programs. And the 3 to start off with were York County, Virginia, Chula Vista, and Lincolnshire in England. So we're doing that to promote drones for good so that all the people can see the different ways they're doing, but it also creates a drone profile that's online that you can see information about that department's particular program. And if you're interested, you can go to our website as well and submit a submission of your own department.
And finally, Drone Responders is going to be launching a new webinar technology series next week. We're going to have GE Aeros joining us to roll out a brand new product called Air Commander. Look for your email. You should see registration links in your email for that. We'll have a registration posted up on the website here for that really soon too. That is going to be next Thursday, I believe at 2 p.m. Eastern time. The new Drone Responders technology series with GE Aeros and their Air Commander. And
one last thing for me.
Oh, yep.
You know, we're facing some strange and challenging times. To all of you out there, please be careful and show how drones for good can make a difference. Thanks.
Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again really soon. We appreciate you tuning in. Bye-bye.